So story number one is time when I'm happy that I wasn't crushed, and then I'm regretful that I got on the plane. Okay? When I was a junior engineer, so I graduated in 2006, and the economy was very hot. And I looked out on a first job working for a firm in Boston. They were just trying to find people to get in, and that's how I kind of slipped through the door. Right? I was underqualified. And I was assigned to be a junior engineer on a project in Philadelphia. Okay? It was a tall structure, and they just needed somebody to review every steel beam before it was fabricated. Now, this is going to sound stupid because I'm 34. Dating myself is not, I'm not going to be dating myself too much, but I remember back in the day when submittals came on paper, okay? Now it's submitted in PDFs and Bluebeam markups electronically. It's great because I used to have to fold thousands of pieces of paper to the point where I lost my fingertips. Like I lost my fingerprints by just folding sheets of paper to get in FedEx every night. Oh, 10 years ago, I tell you, those were tough times. But every once in a blue moon, somebody from our team had to visit the site and just take a look around. So they said, send Mike. He'll go for 2 days. Sounds good. And without getting boring into the details, every building moves. Like every structure is a string, is a spring. You can't get a force out of a spring unless you stretch it. Every building moves. This one, anyone. So one of the jobs of a structural engineer is just to make sure that the springs don't break and everybody dies, one. And two, make sure everything isn't so springy it freaks everybody out. Like if you walk across a bridge that's jumping up and down, you could be safe, but it's going to freak you out. So those are the two main things you're always dealing with. So on this big tower, it was going to be full of researchers, and they had to have glass conference rooms to look out on the Philadelphia skyline. And they didn't want to have any columns. The architect team didn't want to have any columns in the glass view. So the columns had to be pulled back from the edge of the building here to over here. So the main structure was back here, and every conference room was like a diving board. It was cantilevered out to here. It's fine. But if you're out on a diving board and somebody's walking in the hall over there, you kind of feel a bounciness, right? The senior engineering team knew that, so they're like, well, we got to make sure there's no bounciness out there. So they came up with a clever idea where it was a little fussy, but it was clever. Okay, we're going to put the steel structure down. That's cool. We're going to pour concrete down on the diving board, and the concrete's going to, deflect the steel structure so the load comes back here. That's cool. And then after all the concrete's poured, all the way up all these stories, we're going to take a 4-inch post, or 4-inch tie, whatever. It was just a 4-inch pipe, and then we'd stick it here and connect it to the floor above, to connect it to the floor above, to connect to the floor above. So the idea is if somebody's walking on the 4th floor, those vibrations aren't going to matter if all the floors are connected. It was clever. But the trick was you pour the concrete first, let the load go this way, and then you tie those 4-inch pipes. And there were like 60 of them, something. But elsewhere on the job, there were 3 6-inch diameter hangers where you had to switch the order. You had to make sure that the load that was welded first and then pour the concrete, because this area, which is roughly the size of this room, was being hung from the floor above. A 6-inch hanger, a 4-inch tie, clear as day difference, unless you're anybody who's not a structural engineer. And then it just looks like a round circle thing that needs to be welded at some point. So anyway, I go down to a site visit, walking around, it's a hot day, I got to take a taxi, no Uber back then, take a taxi back to get back to catch a flight. And it was like the last half an hour, and the superintendent on the site goes, "Don't worry, Mike, we made sure not to weld any of those hangers, tie things, anywhere on the job so far. We're going to do that at the end." And I'm like, the slabs are all poured on these levels. I'm thinking to myself, That's impossible because if that's not welded, everything in the size of this room, which weighs tons, there's nothing below it. And if you're not hung from something, it can't be there. So I'm like, oh, Jim, okay, let's go over to the third floor and just check a couple things out. Sounds good. So we're walking down, mortified to this area. And the concrete's poured, it's fine. And we walk over to these 6-inch hangers. And by the grace of God, the erector just happened to put an erection bolt or two through there, just as a placeholder, so the thing wouldn't flop in. Both of the bolts were like bent over at a V. So they've failed. And it's like, holy. Okay. So here's something I did right, followed by something I did wrong. So, dear diary, right? What I did right was, geez, I'll make up the contractor's name, I forget. Hey, Lawrence. Okay, I don't know. Hey, so Lawrence, I got to tell you something. These 3 hangers needed to be welded first. Really? I thought, no, these ones need to be first and the other 60 didn't need to be welded. So we have a problem. I don't know how this structure, let's get off it by the way, can't stand. This is an unsafe condition. And when you look down, this was the 3rd floor down to the lobby. It was 2 stories down, 25 feet down. We've got to evacuate this area. This is an unsafe condition, fine. So he goes, oh, okay, good. We'll get everybody mobilized and we'll evacuate the area. This is a big problem, okay. This is kind of before cell phones, and I mean, there's cell phones, but I didn't have one. I emailed my boss from somebody's Packard Bell. It wasn't a Packard Bell, but he wasn't there. And I'm like, well, we'll deal with this tomorrow. I get back on the plane. I fly back to Boston, 9 o'clock next morning. I go to my boss. I'm like, Greg, there's this problem down there. He's like, yeah, I just saw your email, Mike. How did you know the thing wasn't going to collapse in the last 18 hours? Like, how come you weren't there with a little sheriff's badge just cordoning off that area and coordinating a response? Because that is a bad condition. I'm glad nobody died. I'm glad there was some caution tape. But just next time, don't get on the plane. Realize when there's a real problem and make sure nobody gets crushed. We get you a different plane ticket. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So then there was a repair, and it was no problem. But that was just an example of a mildly amusing story of like things you see every day. And I can think of dozens more screw-ups, which half of I caused, half other people's caused. But that's the industry you go into. It's not the math or equations, it's just the communication. The end, right? So, yeah.